All right. Is that working? That's working. Yes. All right. I love the song selection. All this week, they've just been perfect for what we're doing. We're talking today about God's plan for the family. And so I wanted to take a little bit of time and say that when it comes to how to raise your family, you're going to find a lot of opinions about that. Even among people who are religious writers, you're going to find a lot of opinions about that. I remember reading one author who is a religious author who said that all children are born in sin and they have to have the devil beat out of them. So just make sure you beat them often. That was his philosophy. And then there was another one that said, I told my children that if I ever come to them with a belt or anything else, they have my permission to run away because I will never physically discipline my children as long as they live. And these are two guys, both of them claiming to be Christians. And so which one of those are you going to listen to? Or how about this? If you go to a local bookstore, whether it's a Christian bookstore or whether it's a regular bookstore, there's shelf after shelf after shelf of how to raise your kids. And I want to tell you that most of the guys who write those books have advanced degrees and years of experience, lots of counseling, a lot of research that they've done, and they have opposite views on how you're supposed to raise your kids. So whose advice are you going to take when it comes to how to raise your kids? Sometimes I remember thinking that Mark Twain's advice wasn't too bad. He said that when you're raising a son, when he turns 12, put him in a pickle barrel and feed him through the knothole. And when he turns 16, plug up the knothole. And I can remember thinking that may not be such bad advice. I remember that. But what I really want to know is what advice always works? What is it that has the inspiration of God behind it? What is it that has the plan and purpose and blessing of God behind it? And so I want to take you to two Old Testament back-to-back Psalms. The first of these is Psalm 127, the next Psalm 128. And if you have your Bible, you might want to turn there. It's just 11 verses that you have. But if you look at those 11 verses, what you're going to find out is that this is a continual time sequence scenario of family life from beginning to end. If you look at Psalm 127, the first two verses, it's when a couple gets used to that very first few years of marriage together before children enter into the picture. What does he tell you about that time? And that's those first two verses. And then if you look at the last three verses of Psalm 127, it's the family as children are beginning to be introduced into the family. When you get to Psalm 128 and you look at those first three verses, it's those years in which you're discipling and disciplining, raising children to be able to put them into society ultimately. And then the last three verses of Psalm 128 is the family reduced to its original equation. It's the husband and the wife living out their twilight years together. So what does he say about those times? And maybe we'll get some really great divine inspiration, divine thought behind how this is supposed to work. Look at verses 1 and 2 of Psalm 127. Unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. Unless the watchman watches the city, unless the Lord guards the city, the watchman watches in vain. It's vain for you to rise early, to stay up late, to eat the bread of painful labors, for he gives to his beloved sleep. Now, I want you to think about what he's actually saying there. Notice this phrase that keeps coming up twice, unless the Lord builds the house, unless the Lord guards the city. This is, by the way, a Psalm of Solomon. And Solomon is comparing your family to the building of a house and the guarding of a city. And he says, unless the Lord's involved in that your house is not going to make it. Unless the Lord is involved in that, no matter how many watchmen you put on a city, and you remember that when you built a city, you fortified it with a wall, then you put people on top of that wall to make sure the enemy doesn't get. He said it doesn't matter how watchful that watchman is. Unless the Lord is with that city, it's not a safe city. It's not a secure place. So how does that relate to marriage? What are we talking about here? That when you begin your marriage, the Lord must be at the center of that marriage. Unless the Lord builds your home, unless the Lord guards your home, it's an expression of futility. We're going to fail at what we could have been unless the Lord is involved in that. Now, these are difficult times. There's a lot of adjustments that have to be made in those first few years of marriage. You know, it's kind of interesting. I remember hearing people say two can live as cheaply as one. And I want to tell you that either that person has never been married or they're lying through their teeth, because two people actually eat twice as much as one person does. And I have to tell you, it does get more expensive when you get there. And so you've got a lot of things to do. When you first get married, you have to decide who's going to pay the bills. You have to decide who's going to take care of the house. Do we share those duties? And how are we going to share those duties? What are we going to do with those duties? Can I tell you, there are 3 primary times that people get divorced. One of them is in the 2nd year of marriage. The other is in the 7th year of marriage. And the 3rd time where they divorce is in that time between 20 and 25 years of marriage. And more divorces happen during those times than any other time. And the reason for the one that happens in 2 years is because they can never figure out who's going to do what. That we can't decide who's going to pay the bills, who's going to fix the supper, who's going to do this, who's going to do that, and we fuss about it and fight about it, and 2 years is about all people can take of each other when they can't figure it out. And so marriages tend to end in 2 years because we can't get the tasks of marriage figured out. By the way, marriages end at 7 years. Can I tell you, they tend to end in 7 years because of character flaws. If a person is irresponsible, if they're untruthful, if a person is unfaithful, 7 years is about all you can take with them. And so marriages tend to end at 7 years because of character issues. Interestingly enough, 20 to 25, you'd think, man, they've stayed together all this time. Why would they go now? Let me tell you what happens there. And this is because children have come along, and we have sunk our life into our children. I remember when our children, and I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but I remember when our children came along, we ended up with 5 children. And at one point, we had 5 children, I think, in 4 different schools, and we're just a taxi service. I remember Beverly looking at me one day and saying, I think my brain has turned to oatmeal. And I thought, wow, I get it. All we talk about is the kids. All we do is make sure we hand out the money to the right people. We're trying to get them to all the places that they need to go. It was incredible. What happens is that the kids grow up when you've been married 20 to 25 years. And if you haven't still been dating each other, if you haven't invested in each other during those years, then you don't even know who you're married to. You look at, I watch couples who are empty nest couples go out to dinner and sit and never say a word to each other. They don't know what to say. All they've ever talked about for the last 20 years or so is the kids. And now they don't have anything in common. They've forgotten to make their marriage go. If you want a marriage that goes, you start with this common denominator. The Lord is going to build our house. Can I tell you something? Unless you intentionally decide that the Lord is going to build your house, He won't. You can't accidentally do this. You have to do it on purpose. Because if you don't make the Lord the center, if He's not the number one thing in your life, then secular things overwhelm your life. Because you do have to buy the groceries, you do have to pay for the house, you do have to buy the car, you do have to do the things that you do. All of that will take all of your time unless you've made an intentional decision to put the Lord first. So how does the Lord build your house? How is it that He guards your home? How's that going to happen? Well, it's not going to happen just because you put a few verses up on your mirror to remind you of things. It's not going to happen because you have a Bible on your coffee table. That's not going to make the Lord build your house. It's a lot more intentional than that. It means that when we start this marriage, we've decided that our lives belong to Him, that our marriage belongs to Him, that everything about us belongs to Him. Our house, our cars, it's all His. None of this is ours. Every bit of this is His. And there's not going to be any dark cobweb corner in my life where I keep my sin and cherish it over here. There's not going to be in this place where I don't let the Lord in. I let Him into the darkest, ugliest places in my life. That's when the Lord builds your house. That's when the Lord guards your city. And by the way, He's not going to build that house unless you're His. Every night I've talked about this, so I just want to talk about it right now if I can. There may be some people here tonight who, as yet, although you believe in Jesus, and I think you do or you wouldn't be here, you really haven't made him the center of your life. It's a nice thing that the Lord has something to do with it, and when I'm in an emergency, he's like a fire insurance policy. I like him when I really need him, but glorifying him, living for him, denying myself and following him, that doesn't enter into the way that I think. I'm asking you to repent from that. I'm asking you, if you have not yet done it, to be baptized into Christ, where you die to yourself and you rise to walk as one of God's own children. Brand new life. I'm asking you first to give your life to him. And if you're a child of God and being a Christian just means going to church a few times a week and singing a few songs and praying a few prayers and doing our duty and punching our clock, you're missing what your life is about. You're missing the richness of all that life could be. I'm asking you tonight, you who have been baptized into Christ, who have accepted a pedestrian lifestyle instead of an exciting life that you every day find an adventure of faith, every single day. God's opening doors and changing things every single day, and every day I wake up with excitement because what's God going to do today? If that's not your life, I'm asking you to confess your faults to one another and to pray for one another that you can be healed of all that mediocrity. And you'll become what God has intended for you to be all along. We made a transaction when we became a child of God. It was an interesting transaction. God sent his son, he died, and he shed his blood. And at the time that I recognized that I needed him, I didn't want to go to hell. I didn't want my sin to be held against me. I needed to be forgiven. I wanted to go to heaven. And so I told him, please take me to heaven. He says, confess me as Lord then, and be baptized. And I made a confession that really meant I am yours for the rest of my life. And what you want for me is what I want for me for the rest of my life. Are you still keeping that? If not, tonight, some of you may need to be baptized. Some of you may need to come and say, God, forgive me. Brethren, pray for me. Help me. Help me to remember who I am. If you didn't start right, can I just say that it's never too late to start doing the right thing? It's not going to be easy, but I will tell you that you will eat the bread of painful labors if you're trying to make money in your life and you're leaving God out of the whole picture. You'll get up early and you'll go to bed late, eat the bread of painful labors. But here's what he says, and I love this. If you have the New King James, it says, for he gives to his beloved sleep. But if you have some other translations, it's very interesting because I think it's the sense of what actually the Hebrew means here. For he gives to his beloved even in his sleep. It means that if you will make a commitment to serve God, even while you're sleeping, God will work overtime to give you the things you need to make that commitment stick. Put him first. Above work, above anything else, put him first. Get your priorities right where they need to be, and I promise you, God will bless you. Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things, what we'll eat, what we'll drink, what we'll put on, all these things will be added to you. Put him first. If you want a family that has the best of this life and the best of the life to come, let the Lord build your house. That's where you need to start. That's the family as it starts out. And then you get to verses 3 through 5, and this is the time where children enter into the picture. Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord, or a gift of the Lord, and the fruit of the womb is his reward. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior, so are the children of one's youth. Happy is the man who has his quiver full of them. They shall not be ashamed, but will speak with their enemies in the gates. That's really interesting. Happy is the man who has his quiver full of them. We had 5 kids. We had a pretty full quiver. I'm just telling you, we really did. I loved it. I always had to go to church early, get to the building early, because I had to make sure that everything was going every day. So Beverly had to get 5 kids ready. By the way, it's interesting to me that I watch families that continually get to church 10 minutes late. I mean, they just do. And if they tell me, if I ask them why, they say, well, you know, I've had kids. I said, would you go talk to my wife? We had 5. They said, okay, we'll be our own time. They didn't want to talk to Beverly because they knew what she would do. She said, get up early, get these kids ready, get them going. We had services at 8:15 for a long time. One family was always 15 minutes late. So we moved services to 9 o'clock. Guess what? They're always 15 minutes late. Doesn't matter. They're always going to be 15 minutes late. Make a priority here. Blessed is the man who has his quiver full of them. And yes, guess what? You're also going to get really tired when you have your quiver full of them. I can't believe how many diapers it takes for babies. I can't believe it. I can't believe how much teenagers eat. I can't believe what that's like. It's incredibly, incredibly difficult and expensive. And it really is. And when you think about it, if I want to send them to college, if I have a full quiver, this is going to get really tough. It really is. I remember when our kids were small, that people would come to me and they would say things like this. I'm having some problems, but you wouldn't know about that because you're a preacher. Yeah. I would tell them, let me tell you about my house. We have a holy bubble that's over our house, and God just keeps all the problems away. Our house, from the moment we wake up to the time we go to sleep, is unmatched peace. We just never have any problems. Our kids, their teeth are straight, and everything else is really good. You know, I don't have to worry about it. They always go to bed right when we want them to without us having to tell. I said, let me tell you about my family. Let me tell you about what it was like to raise kids when there was. Several of our children had to have orthodontic devices. I don't know about you, but I have fished mine out of the garbage disposal because they fell out or something, and we ended up having to go back to the dentist. I remember that. I remember walking in the rain to deliver things that they had sold for the band and everybody else that nobody really wanted, but my kids were cute. And I ended up having to buy, I don't know how many dozen bars of candy because I don't know, nobody else wanted them, and I ended up having to do that. I remember my daughter, as we were in an interview for a move to another place not too far from here, was sitting across from one of the elders and began to projectile vomit all over him. I'll never forget that day. That was the shortest interview I have ever had. And they hired me anyway. Maybe it was a good thing that she threw up all over him. I don't know. But I have rock sick cats. I have been there when they were born. I have gone through, and by the way, I don't know about y'all's, but we have a dryer that eats a sock a load. And I have no idea where that sock goes. I don't know. There is a sock heaven or something. I don't know where they end up, but we end up without one sock all the time. It just really happens. It happens to me. It probably happens to you too. But in the meantime, with all this stuff that we've gone through, Beverly and I have built up a rich treasure of memories. And to this day, we still laugh about them, even the stuff that at the time didn't seem to be all that funny. We still, when we get together as a family, talk about some of those crazy times that we all had. And we still laugh at the same stories. The kids aren't home now, but the memories are rich. Children are a gift of God. As the children come into your family, it's important that you need to understand this. Children are a gift of God. I remember when Jim was born, our first one, we had then moved after he was born to Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I remember the exact spot I was driving down the road when Beverly looked at me and said, guess what? I said, no, we haven't even paid for Jim yet. I mean, we still owe on him. You can't be pregnant. You can't be expecting a baby. How did this happen? And I got kind of upset with her until I realized I had something to do with that. And Tiffany came along. She was not expected, but she was such a gift. What an amazing gift she was. And every one of the children that came into our lives were absolutely unique. I hear people every once in a while say, I don't understand how my children turned out so differently. I raised them all exactly alike. Well, that's a mistake. Don't raise your children exactly alike. The Bible says in Proverbs 22, verse 6, train up a child in the way he should go. And by the way, we beat parents over the head with that all the time. Because it says, when he's old, he'll not depart from it. He's not even talking about what you think he's talking about. If you look at the Hebrew and look at what it actually says, it says, train up a child according to his way, and when he's old enough to shave, he'll not depart from that. In other words, look at your children carefully, recognize the differences in every one of those children. Some of your children you can just look at and they melt. Other children just are dying to be spanked. I don't know why. I don't know why that is. My brother, I bless his heart, such a great guy. I think my mama spanked him every day until he got married. I don't know, but he just wasn't happy unless he got a spanking every day. That's what he wanted. Okay. On the other hand, we had a daughter that I could just look at like I'm so disappointed in. It was just like it crushed her. That was her life. Every one of them is different. Train them up according to their way so that they figure out who they are and stay true to themselves, which is what the passage is about. It's not about training them and telling them everything that they need to know about God, and then when they get to be old and gray, that they'll come back to Him. That's not what that passage is saying at all. Please don't beat parents up with that anymore. But value every one of them as a precious gift. God gave us children. Can I just tell you something? Families are smaller today than they were a couple of generations ago. And you can possibly make the mistake of thinking that parents a couple of generations ago loved children more than parents love children today. That's not true. Parents a couple of generations ago generally lived in rural areas and farms. And you know why they had a lot of children? Because that was cheap labor, that's why. They had children as cheap labor, and that's what they did. It's not that we love our children, but if the children didn't do the work, if they didn't do what my mother used to call chores, if they didn't do their chores, the economy of the family was damaged if they didn't do those chores. I'm going to ask you who have children today, if they don't do the chores that you give them, is it going to affect you financially at all? It's not. It's not. Is it important that they learn responsibility? Yeah. But you don't need them for the finances. Can I tell you, God could make money machines out of rocks. He made His children for a different reason. He's growing us up as we're growing them up. He's making us the people that He wants us to be. So treasure your children as they come. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior, so are the children of one youth. You're going to point your children, sharpen them in their life, and point them to places you'll never be able to go. My purpose in seeing them is to a generation, 2 generations, 10 generations down the road, what I do today matters. Well, that brings me to the third thing. Let me just go with you those first 3 verses of Psalm 128. This is the time where your children are growing up. You're disciplining, discipling them, and getting them ready to go out into the world. They're turning into teenagers here. Listen to what he says. Blessed is everyone who fears the Lord, who walks in His ways. When you eat the labor of your hands, you'll be happy and it will be well with you. Your wife will be like a fruitful vine in the very heart of your house. Your children like olive plants all around your table. Somebody says, sounds like a pipe dream to me. I remember people telling me when our kids were small, enjoy them now because you're going to hate them when they get to be teenagers. Can I just tell you, we never hated our children ever. Did they stretch us? Did they challenge us? Did they make us think about things? As my children turned teenagers, I realized that I had not actually grown through a lot of things. I had just gotten older, that I hadn't figured out the things they were wrestling with, and I had to help them figure it out as I figured it out for myself. Children will stretch you and challenge you, but oh, what precious people they are. He says you'll be happy, blessed. Happy is the man who fears the Lord and walks in His ways. Happy when he has the labor of his hands. Happy when he sees his wife at the table. Happy when the children are sitting around it. Somebody says, how does that happen? Well, here's the way it happens. When you started your marriage, the Lord came first. As your children came in, you valued every one of them as a unique and individual gift from God. And you've been loving them all along, training them all along, because they're arrows to be shot into the future. So when they get to be teenagers, they're about to go into the future. And you'll be happy if you did it right. If you started right, this is a wonderful time in your life. There will come a time where you'll wish you had it back. But I think God calls on us to do two things incredibly well. When our children are teenagers, there are two things that I must do well if I'm going to be the parent that God blesses. Number one, I have to be absolutely real with them. I have to tell them the truth. Don't give your children the phony baloney messages that, well, when I was dating your mother, we saved holding hands until after we got married because we thought we had to save something for marriage. They know better. They know better. When I was a kid, we had to walk through the snow uphill both ways 3 miles to get to school. They know better. Okay, they know better. Your children can take anything except hypocrisy. You tell them the truth. If you failed when you were their age, don't be afraid to tell them that. I heard a father talk to his teenage son some time back, and he said, "Son, I've already climbed to the top of Mount Stupid. I'm trying to keep you off of it." I thought that was pretty good. He admitted where he had been, okay? Don't be afraid to admit that you failed and you've learned from your failures and you don't want them to fail. When the Bible talked about what it's like in the Shema back in Deuteronomy chapter 6, this was what was said every night, before they had their meal every night. The Lord our God, the Lord is one, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. They said it every night. And what were they saying? We don't know what's going to happen next, and sometimes, kids, we're scared to death, but here's what we do know. The Lord is our God. And if the Lord is our God, things will work out even though I don't know how they're going to work out just yet. I'm trusting Him, and you can too. They can take that. They can take your fear. You need to be able to tell them every once in a while, "I'm sorry." Don't be afraid to apologize when you got it wrong. Be real with your kids. The second thing you have to do extremely well when your kids are teenagers is you have to show them affection when they're teenagers. That big, hairy teenage son that you have, the one who smells bad after football practice, that guy. He still needs to have affection in his life. He still needs a mom that says, "You're a great young man." He still needs a dad to put an arm around him every once in a while and say, "I haven't told you lately, but I'm proud of you and I love you." He needs that. Did you know the number one predictor for early pregnancy, unmarried pregnancy in young women is a father who is absent or distant? Every young girl needs a man in her life that she can trust. Dads, don't back out when she hits puberty and say, "Well, I'm just..." No, she needs you then. She needs to know that there is a man who sees her for who she is and loves her and blesses her in her life. You have to show affection. I thought it was interesting that in an experiment done by Russians back in the 60s, they took baby chimpanzees and they put them separately. I thought it was interesting. They had 6 over here and 6 over here, and they had an anatomically correct wire mesh mother over here that they could still drink from. And then they had an anatomically correct wire mesh mother over here, but she was covered with foam and terry cloth so that she was soft. And 6 of them could only drink from the terry cloth mother. And 6 could only drink from the wire mesh mother. But here's what they discovered, is that all 12 of them would gather around the wire mesh mother, and they would hold on to her and rub her. And unless they were just starving, they didn't ever go to the wire mesh mother. And the Russians discovered that affection and touch meant more than physical food. And it doesn't just happen with chimpanzees. It happens with people. Love your kids. I don't know very many kids that I think are bad kids. I know a lot of parents who aren't great. Be better at being a parent. Love your kids. You can change their life. Well, so that brings you to the last part. I know I'm just kind of moving through this, but I hope you'll go with me to verses 4 through 6. Behold, thus shall the man be blessed who fears the Lord. The Lord bless you out of Zion. May you see the good of Jerusalem all the days of your life. Yes, may you see your children's children. Peace be upon Israel. What does he say about that time? This is the time the kids are all gone. What's it going to be like for you when the kids are all gone? He says, first of all, you'll be blessed because you feared the Lord through the whole thing. Secondly, Jerusalem will be better. It will be blessed. He says, the Lord bless you out of Zion. May you see the good of Jerusalem all the days of your life. The city you live in will be a better city because you raised your children in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord. Peace be upon Israel. The nation will be better because you raised your children honestly, because you have delivered into the world people of faith. The folks who run cash registers know that there's an honest person that's running that now. The person who needs to be involved in finance knows that there's an honest person that is there. The nation is better because you raised your children in the nurture of the Lord. Peace be upon Israel. May you see your children's children. We don't know how much time we have with our children. A couple of years ago, I was in Red River, New Mexico, and I called my son who was living in California. We had a conversation, and he sounded bad, and I said, son, listen, when I get back into Nashville, when I drive in from Red River, I'm going to call my doctor, and I'm going to fly you here, and you're going to see my doctor. And he said, I would really appreciate that. As we were driving home from Red River, we got a call that he was found dead. You have no idea how much time you're going to have. There's not enough time to love them like they need to be loved. May you see your children's children. May the world be better because you've raised your children in a godly home. One of these days, you're going to walk into your daughter's room and you're going to pick up all the stuffed animals and the toys that are in that room scattered all over the place. You're going to make up an untidy bed. You're going to vacuum the floor. And you're going to say, and I want it to stay that way. And you'll walk in a week later and it will be perfect. One of these days, you're going to walk into the bathroom and you're going to get all the soap scum off of that tub. You're going to take all of the squeaky toys out and put them right where they're supposed to be. You're going to get all the soiled towels and wash them up, and you say, and I don't want you to soil towels like this again. And the next day, they're just perfect. One of these days, you're going to make your favorite dessert. And you're going to say, I don't want a piece cut out of this. I don't even want a fingerprint in this icing until after supper. And you will eat your supper, and the cake will be perfect. One of these days, you'll say, why don't you kids grow up? And the silence will answer back, we did. What will your life be like then? It all depends on what you're doing right now. If your children are grown and gone, call them up. Tell them that you love them. Encourage them in the Lord. If your children are still at home, love them. If your mamas and daddies are still alive, and I would give anything if mine were, call them up, go see them, spend some time with them. Let them tell you the same old stories they still love to tell. Love them. Because this life doesn't last forever. And we have a chance here. We have a chance to do something magnificent, full of light in a world of darkness. You have that moment. But you can't bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord if you're not in the Lord. So tonight, I don't know who you are or what's going on with all of you. I will tell you this. If you want a great life, if you want a happy life, if you want a peaceful life, I'm not talking about a life where lots of things aren't going on. I'm talking about a peaceful life. If you want a joyful life, you need to be with the Lord. If you haven't been baptized, don't wait. If you need to come and ask for prayer, don't wait. If you're a parent and you're afraid what your kids are going to think about you, they're going to love you. That's what they're going to think. More importantly, so will God. Why don't you come while we stand and sing?